The death that changed Tanzania. In March 2021, Tanzania's political heart stopped beating. The official announcement came at 10:15 p.m. on March 17, 2021. President John Magufuli, age 61, had died. The statement from then Vice President Samia Suluhu Hassan cited heart complications. But few Tanzanians believed that was the full story. For 10 days before his death, Magufuli had disappeared from public view. Rumors swirled. Some said he had been flown secretly to Kenya, others claimed India. His administration had been obsessed with secrecy, even over health. Now that secrecy was consuming him. By dawn the next day, the nation was in shock. Crowds gathered outside hospitals, whispering, waiting for clarity. But clarity never came. Instead, what followed was a power transition so smooth, so rehearsed, that it raised more questions than it answered. At 10 a.m. on March 19th, Samia Suluhu Hassan, then Vice President, took the oath as Tanzania's first female head of state. Her voice was calm, almost subdued, when she promised to continue Magufuli's vision. Yet inside State House, insiders said the transition was anything but continuity. It was consolidation. For years, Magufuli had been both celebrated and feared. To the poor, he was the bulldozer, a populist who fought corruption and defied foreign powers. To critics, he was an authoritarian who silenced dissent and choked the press. But to his loyalists, he represented stability, a strong hand holding a fragile nation together. When he died, that hand vanished, and the vacuum began to hum. Within 48 hours, key figures from Magufuli's Security Council were dismissed. The influential chief of intelligence, Diwani Athamani, was reassigned. Several ministers close to Magufuli's industrialization agenda quietly vanished from public appearances. In Dar es Salaam, fear began to spread, not of what had happened, but of what was coming. The government declared a 21-day mourning period. Black ribbons lined the streets. Schoolchildren sang hymns. But even during the mourning, something was off. State television avoided broadcasting close-up images of the body lying in state. There were no medical reports, no post-mortem details, just a burial, swift and silent, under heavy guard in Chato, his hometown. Then came the whispers. Doctors who had treated Magufuli spoke of respiratory failure, not cardiac arrest. Others hinted that he had succumbed to the very virus he had publicly denied existed. The administration issued no denial, but no confirmation either. For a country of nearly 60 million, truth had just become the rarest resource. By April 2021, President Samia had begun her own chapter. The tone of her government shifted. Overnight, from the hard nationalist defiance of Magufuli to a more globalist, conciliatory language. Western ambassadors who had been sidelined during Magufuli's era suddenly returned to the palace. In May, the new government reopened talks with the International Monetary Fund, securing a $372 million emergency loan, the same institution Magufuli had once accused of economic colonization. To the outside world, it looked like progress. To Tanzanians who had supported Magufuli's economic independence model, it felt like surrender. The transition from self-reliance to compliance was complete in less than 6 months. Inside the ruling party, Chama Cha Mapinduzi, CCM, fault lines widened. The Magufuli faction, mostly young, nationalist MPs and provincial governors, grew restless. They accused the new president of dismantling the foundations of sovereignty that Magufuli had built, the local content mining laws, the manufacturing subsidies, the restrictions on foreign energy firms. But Samia had numbers on her side and quiet backing from abroad. By July 2022, key Magufuli loyalists began disappearing from both politics and public life. The most notable was Hussein Bash, former agriculture minister, who had been vocal about protecting Tanzanian farmers from foreign fertilizer cartels. Officially, he resigned for personal reasons. Off the record, insiders said he had been warned. In the same month, journalist Azari Gwanda, who had been missing since 2017, was quietly declared presumed dead. The message was unmistakable. Under the new Tanzania, silence was policy. The international press framed Samia as a reformer, even a feminist icon. The BBC called her the soft power president. CNN described her as the woman bringing Tanzania back to the world. But at home, the world was closing in. By December 2022, Human Rights Watch recorded over 200 arrests of activists and journalists. The Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition was temporarily suspended. Protests in Mwanza and Mbeya were dispersed with live ammunition. And for the first time in 5 years, private radio stations began broadcasting with state censors sitting in their studios. The bulldozer's era of authoritarian nationalism had simply changed its uniform. Repression had become polite. When historians look back, they will call March 2021 the month Tanzania changed direction, but no one noticed the turn. In that moment between grief and transition, the country traded one kind of silence for another, the silence of fear for the silence of diplomacy. And in that silence, the seeds of a darker story began to grow. The rise of Samia and the return of fear, 2021 to 2023. By mid-2021, the world had embraced President Samia Suluhu Hassan as the new face of Tanzanian reform. To diplomats, she was the antidote to Magufuli's isolation. To investors, she was opportunity reborn. To many Tanzanians, she was still a mystery. Her first year in power unfolded like a quiet rebranding campaign. International summits, photo ops with heads of state, the reopening of frozen projects. It was a charm offensive as calculated as it was effective. In October 2021, Tanzania rejoined the Open Government Partnership, a global transparency initiative Magufuli had withdrawn from in 2017. By December, the European Union had pledged €100 million in new aid. But at home, the air grew colder. The reversal of Magufuli's reforms. To understand the change, you have to go back to Magufuli's economic vision, his insistence on resource nationalism. He believed Tanzania's gold, gas, and nickel should serve Tanzanians first. Between 2015 and 2020, he had imposed local content laws, forcing foreign miners to process or within the country. It was a bold policy, one that increased local employment but infuriated multinationals. By 2022, under Samia, those laws were quietly rewritten. Foreign mining firms once again gained majority control of joint ventures. In January that year, the government signed a $1.3 billion liquefied natural gas deal with Statoil and Shell, the same deal. Magufuli had stalled for being exploitative. When critics questioned the new terms, the energy minister called them anti-development. In private, a senior official described it differently. We were told to be flexible or be replaced. Flexibility, it seemed, was the new patriotism. The return of the IMF. In July 2022, the International Monetary Fund approved a $372.4 million emergency financing package for Tanzania. Officially, it was meant to help the economy recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. But the conditions were clear: lift industrial subsidies, privatize energy sectors, and loosen restrictions on foreign capital. To the IMF, it was standard procedure. To Tanzanians, it felt like déjà vu, the return of the old dependency Magufuli had sworn to end. Within months, prices of fuel and imported goods soared. The government responded with a familiar phrase: global inflation. But everyone knew that inflation had a local address: Dar es Salaam. A softer voice, a firmer hand. President Samia projected warmth. Her public speeches were calm, almost maternal. But behind that soft voice, security agencies were growing louder. By late 2022, the Tanzania Intelligence and Security Service, TISS, had expanded surveillance under what insiders called the Digital Stability Directive. WhatsApp groups critical of the government were infiltrated. Editors received anonymous guidelines on sensitive coverage. The once vocal Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition, THRDC, was suspended for 6 months on claims of procedural violations. In truth, they had published a report on police brutality. The message was clear: democracy was welcome, as long as it behaved. They disappeared. According to the Tanganyika Law Society, between 2021 and 2023, at least 83 individuals, Journalists, activists, and opposition figures either disappeared or were detained without trial. Among them was Freeman Mbowe, leader of the main opposition party, Chadema. He was arrested in July 2021 and charged with terrorism. The evidence? A recorded conversation in which he allegedly discussed unconstitutional change. His trial lasted 8 months. His bail was denied 6 times. When he was finally released in March 2022, he appeared gaunt but defiant. "The rule of law," he said, "is now an instrument of fear." His words were quoted by independent media, then erased by state outlets. A nation of cameras. In 2023, the government announced a nationwide smart security upgrade. The Ministry of Home Affairs installed 8,000 new CCTV cameras across major cities, claiming it was to combat urban crime. But residents noticed something peculiar. Most cameras faced not roads or markets, but government buildings and opposition offices. A leaked procurement document later revealed that the system's data servers were linked directly to the Presidential Communications Bureau, bypassing police oversight. The opposition called it digital colonialism. The ruling party called it modern governance. The price of obedience, while foreign investors applauded stability. Everyday Tanzanians began to feel the cost. The 2023 budget report showed external debt had ballooned to $42 billion, nearly double what it was when Samia took office. Public hospitals faced shortages of basic medicine. Fuel subsidies were slashed. Meanwhile, government officials purchased new fleets of luxury SUVs. An economist at the University of Dar es Salaam called it a textbook case of external capture. A week later, he was suspended for academic misconduct. The return of the fear. By mid-2023, even laughter carried risk. Comedians were summoned for mocking politicians. Church leaders were cautioned for political sermons. Student unions were disbanded for unauthorized activism. The Committee to Protect Journalists recorded that Tanzania had slipped to 147th out of 180 on the World Press Freedom Index, its lowest ranking in a decade. For ordinary citizens, it was as if the Magufuli era's fear had been reborn, this time wearing a diplomatic smile. The forgotten promises. In her early months, President Samia had promised reconciliation. She had even met with opposition figures, inviting them to the State House. But by 2023, those photos of unity had become relics. Reconciliation had given way to retribution. Opposition rallies remained banned under the same Public Order Act Magufuli had used. The only difference was the language. Where Magufuli roared, Samia reasoned. Yet the outcome was the same: silence. The vanishing hope. By September 2023, the cracks were undeniable. Youth unemployment stood at 23%. Inflation reached 8.7%. And the ruling CCM began preparing for the 2025 general election under a slogan that many found ironic: Tanzania Daima, stability first. But beneath the surface, a new resistance was forming, quietly, cautiously, underground. Former army officers, trade unionists, journalists, and exiled activists began to talk again. Their message was simple. The system that replaced the bulldozer had rebuilt the same road, just with smoother asphalt. The world outside saw progress, aid money, summits, smiles. Inside Tanzania, the silence grew heavier. The opposition wasn't just silenced, it was being rewritten out of existence. And by the time the world noticed, the next chapter had already begun. The year 2024, when repression turned into revolt. By January 2024, Tanzania had entered what political observers quietly called the season of suspicion. Officially, the country was preparing for the 2025 general election. Unofficially, the ruling circle was preparing for something else entirely: control without contest. The year begins in silence. At the start of the year, the Ministry of Home Affairs issued a security harmonization order. Publicly, it was meant to prevent unrest. Privately, it meant every gathering of more than 10 people now required police clearance. Markets, churches, even student debates began to receive written warnings. In February 2024, provincial radio stations in Dodoma, and Mwanza were ordered to submit all political interviews for review. Several editors resigned rather than comply. The Tanzania Communications Authority later denied censorship, calling it technical standardization. But in newsroom corridors, reporters began whispering what everyone knew. That standardization was the new censorship, the disappearance of voices. Between February and April, civil society networks recorded at least 27 arrests of community organizers. None were formally charged. Their families filed missing person reports that went unanswered. Opposition leaders tried to speak out. In April 2024, prominent reform advocate Tundu Lissu returned from self-imposed exile for a series of rallies. Within days he was detained under Section 39 of the Public Order Act on allegations of inciting hostility against the state. The arrest took place on April 9, 2024, moments before he was due to appear on national television. State media reported that Lissu was cooperating with investigators. His lawyers were denied access for nearly 2 weeks. That same month, a member of parliament from the Lake Zone vanished while traveling to Dar es Salaam. Security agencies said there was no record of detention. His family received an anonymous message, "Stop asking." The end of illusion. By October 2024, the ruling party announced its candidate list for the upcoming October 2025 election. Internal primaries showed 98.7% support for the incumbent president, a number reminiscent of old one-party states. State television broadcast cheering crowds, drone shots of green and gold flags, and yet, away from the cameras, electricity shortages darken half the capital. Analysts inside the country began calling it stability theatre. One political scientist, speaking on condition of anonymity, said, "The goal is no longer legitimacy, it's inevitability." The quiet exodus. By year's end, exile had become the new opposition. Journalists fled to Nairobi and Kampala. Academics left for Europe. Those who stayed learned the art of self-editing, of writing truth in metaphors and survival in silence. A veteran reporter summed it up in one line: "We used to fear bullets. Now we fear invisibility." A nation at the edge. The government's official year-end report claimed GDP growth of 5.2% and political calm. Yet beneath that calm ran tension thick as smoke. Families spoke in codes. Young men disappeared at checkpoints. In coffee shops, voices lowered when the president's name was mentioned. Tanzania, once seen as East Africa's beacon of peace, had entered its darkest calm, a silence heavy enough to break radios. The coup whispers and the viral video, 2025. A slow rhythmic hum rises under the journalist's voice, the sound of engines idling, of something vast waiting to move. The new year began with optimism on paper. Government bulletins spoke of economic recovery, digital modernization, and enhanced civic harmony. But on the streets of Dar es Salaam, harmony sounded a lot like hesitation. For most citizens, 2025 felt less like a new chapter and more like a countdown. Fuel prices remain high, youth unemployment stayed above 23%, and civil service wages were frozen for a third year. Official explanations pointed to external headwinds. Ordinary Tanzanians called it tightening. January, the calm before the static. On January 3rd, the administration launched its Vision 2030 Acceleration Plan, a glossy roadmap promising foreign investment and smart city infrastructure. Yet the fine print revealed that several major ports and rail concessions were being offered to strategic international operators. Critics read that as the return of economic dependency, independent analysts tried to discuss the deals on national television. Their segments were pulled minutes before airtime. The phrase technical issue became the new censorship code. That same week, the Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition quietly resumed work after a long suspension, only to face another compliance audit. Its director described the atmosphere as permission by exhaustion. February, rising friction. By February 2025, tension had migrated from civilian life into the ranks of the security forces. Lower-level officers complained about delayed pay and new loyalty oaths. requiring them to pledge allegiance not only to their constitution but to the leadership. Several refused to sign. In barracks conversations that would later leak online, soldiers joked that even the flag now reports upward. The joke didn't last long. 2 units were reassigned overnight to remote posts near the southern border. Meanwhile, in the capital, student protests over rising tuition spread to 3 universities. Police used water cannons. Arrests followed. State media showed calm campuses the next day. The footage, later geolocated by independent outlets, turned out to be 6 months old. March, economy of fear. March brought numbers that could not be edited. The national debt passed $45 billion. Inflation hit 10%, the highest in 15 years. Imported food staples, rice, maize, cooking oil, rose by double digits. As markets entered, social media criticism spiked. In response, the Communications Authority issued new cyber responsibility guidelines, threatening account suspensions for economic alarmism. Within a week, 43 activist pages vanished. Hashtags of dissent disappeared from trending lists, replaced by official campaigns praising stability. April, a flash in the sky. On April 4th, Tanzania's calm cracked. From an unverified location, a short video surfaced online. A man in uniform, later identified by fellow officers as Colonel John Charles Tesha, appeared before a faded national flag. His tone was measured, almost weary. "We swore to defend this land," he said, "not to guard silence. The nation's loyalty belongs to its people, not to any chair of power." The clip lasted only 71 seconds. Within hours it had crossed borders. Reposted by bloggers in Nairobi, Kampala, and Johannesburg. Hashtags multiplied. Hashtag Tesha speaks. Hashtag voice from the barracks. For the first time in years, Tanzanians heard defiance from within the uniform. The government called the video fabricated. State broadcasters aired a pre-recorded segment showing calm military drills and loyal commanders. But in coffee shops and commuter buses, everyone had already seen the clip. By evening, it had reached 2 million views before being deleted across all major platforms. Colonel Tesha was never seen again. May, echoes and denials. May opened with denials. Officials described reports of unrest as foreign disinformation campaigns. Yet signs of fracture kept appearing. Fuel depots guarded by armored trucks. Sudden curfews in coastal towns. Late-night helicopter patrols over Dar es Salaam. Whistleblowers inside. The Energy Ministry leaked documents showing emergency tenders worth $180 million for security logistics. When questioned, the spokesperson replied that the contracts were for election readiness. To observers, readiness looked a lot like fear. June, the information blackout. On June 12th, at exactly 8 p.m., mobile data in multiple regions went dark. Messaging apps failed, independent outlets froze mid-sentence, and state television looped patriotic songs. For 36 hours, Tanzania was digitally silent. When service returned, government channels explained it as a submarine cable fault. But engineers later noted that the outage affected only domestic networks, not international traffic. During those 36 hours, soldiers were seen surrounding several opposition officers. No arrests were confirmed. None were denied. July, the outer world responds. International observers began to take notice. Regional organizations issued carefully worded statements, urging respect for constitutional order. Western embassies called for transparency, though none suspended aid. To the administration, silence from allies was as valuable as endorsement. At the same time, diaspora activists in London and Washington organized online forums titled The Vanishing Republic. Thousands joined virtually, demanding accountability. Inside Tanzania, those links were quietly blocked. August, fear of the future. By August 2025, the narrative had split. State television broadcast optimism, new housing projects, industrial parks, smiling citizens. Independent reports told of food shortages in rural Morogoro and migration toward the coast. Civil servants described a new internal memo classifying certain phrases, sovereignty, justice, people's power, as potentially subversive. The order was dated August 18th. From that day forward, even slogans carried risk. September, the whisper networks. As elections approached, opposition parties operated through encrypted voice notes and code phrases. Journalists formed clandestine shadow newsrooms, using cloud drives mirrored outside the country. Citizens relied on shortwave radio for updates. Foreign correspondents, who arrived to cover the story found themselves trailed by unmarked cars. Several had credentials revoked for breach of hospitality protocol. In private, diplomats admitted that the situation was volatile. Publicly, they congratulated Tanzania for its commitment to democratic continuity. October, countdown to an election. By October 1st, 2025, campaign posters covered every wall. Every poster bore the same face. The opposition's candidate list had been invalidated over registration. Irregularities. Polling day was set for October 29th, 2025. Analysts predicted a 99% victory for the ruling party. In the markets, people joked that even the ballots would vote by themselves. But beneath the humor lay exhaustion and a quiet resolve. Because by now, everyone knew that history doesn't always announce itself with gunfire. Sometimes it begins with a video that won't stay deleted. Subscribe channel for more updates about what's happening in Africa right now and for African diaspora news.